It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? How the very same pathways in our brain that light up with pleasure also register pain.
Right. They act almost like a seesaw, kind of balancing each other out.
Exactly. And we've all felt that teetering point, haven't we? That moment when, say, the sheer joy of the first sip of morning coffee starts to fade, and suddenly you need that second cup.
Or when you're deep in a great book and the ending looms and there's this actual sense of disappointment.
Yeah. Neuroscientifically, that's that pleasure-pain balance tipping over.
That feeling of wanting as the pleasure dips, that's really key here. It shows how our brains are constantly anticipating and reacting, not just to reward, but also to its absence,
Precisely. And that's really what we want to dive into today. We're going to explore the neuroscience behind reward, what drives our desires, what makes us seek things out, and maybe how we can navigate that tricky balance between pleasure and pain a bit better for a more, I guess, fulfilling life.
Yeah, and you've shared some really compelling material with us, looking at the basic nature of pleasure, the role of pain, and that sort of universal human search for equilibrium.
And crucially, we'll also be drawing on these really powerful firsthand accounts from people who've faced, well, significant challenges with compulsive overconsumption, particularly people who've struggled with addiction.
Because looking at those extremes, it often gives us much clearer insight into the mechanisms that actually influence all of us. Their experiences teach us a lot about desire, its intensity, and the sheer complexity of trying to self-regulate.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. This idea of our modern dopamine economy. It sounds a bit sci-fi, maybe, but the more you think about it.
Well, it's a pretty useful way to frame how the sheer availability of highly rewarding stuff has reshaped what we want. You could almost say our economy is increasingly driven by finding and marketing things that hit that reward button in our brains.
And this constant stimulation changes the whole landscape, right, of what we crave and how badly we crave it.
Definitely. And technology has just turbocharged this whole process.
Oh, massively. You mentioned that example about cigarettes. The production increased thanks to machines, going from just a few hand-rolled ones a minute to, what, tens of thousands?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. That single invention just dramatically changed how accessible nicotine was. And we've seen similar shifts technologically driven across all sorts of pleasure sources.
Right. Like, think about the difference between older substances and the super potent options we have today.
Exactly. When we talk about pharmaceutical opioids, oxycodone, hydrocodone, fentanyl, we're in a totally different league of potency.
Yeah, that image you shared of the patient with the fentanyl lollipop, that really hits home. Fentanyl being 50, even 100 times stronger than morphine, that's a huge shift in the reward intensity available.
It really highlights how concentrated these things have become. And it's not just opioids. I mean, look at e-cigarettes.
Right. Seemingly less harmful, maybe.
But they deliver nicotine really effectively, discreetly, often with flavors designed to attract younger people, potentially leading to much higher nicotine consumption than cigarettes ever did.
And then there's this concept of using multiple drugs, polypharmacy, the timeline you shared about Max.
Ah, yes.
Going from experimenting with alcohol and cannabis as a teen to using, 14 different substances by age 30. It just shows how quickly things can escalate when these options are everywhere.
Max's path, while maybe extreme, it really shows how easily people can get tangled up seeking relief or pleasure from various sources, often leading to, dangerous combinations and increasingly difficult patterns of use.
So it's not just the stuff itself being available, but also how we're influenced by seeing others, especially online. This idea of social contagion in the digital world is, it's quite something.
It is. It's almost like watching a flock of birds, isn't it? One takes off and suddenly the whole group just follows.
Yeah. Online platforms can sort of normalize behaviors just through sheer exposure. You see other people doing something, even risky stuff, and it can create this sense of, maybe it's okay, and lowers your own barriers.
You shared Jacob's experience, right, in those online chat rooms?
Yes, the initial thrill of participating in sexual activities, but then this deep guilt afterwards, feeling he might be encouraging addiction in others. That makes the whole contagion idea feel very real.
Jacob's struggle there is powerful. He felt the pull of that online world, but also saw the potential harm for himself and others. And that anecdote from Detective Dutto.
About the driver under the influence after being online?
Yeah, it suggests a pretty direct link sometimes between online influence and real-world actions.
And Jacob's story gets even more disturbing, doesn't it? With the introduction of that remotely controlled electrical stimulation. That escalation and then his marriage breaking down. It just highlights the really profound damaging impact these online things can have on our actual offline lives and relationships.
It really does. It shows how these virtual connections, even if they feel intense, can come at a huge cost to our real-life connections and just our general well-being.
This also touches on vulnerability, I think.
Yeah.
It seems like in this dopamine-soaked world, some groups might be more susceptible to compulsive overconsumption. You pointed out how people in wealthy nations who are poor or less educated can be particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, if you connect the dots. Easy access to high-reward stuff combined with limited access to essentials like meaningful work, safe housing, good education, healthcare. It can create a kind of perfect storm.
So people turn to these easy rewards to cope, or just find some pleasure that's missing elsewhere.
It seems that way. It can be a way to manage stress, find an escape, or seek sensation.
And this connects to those deeply worrying statistics around deaths of despair.
Right. The rising death rates among middle-aged white Americans without college degrees, drug overdoses, alcohol-related liver disease, suicide being the main drivers. It's a really troubling picture of the human cost.
Yeah, those findings by Ann Case and Angus Deaton are stark. It's not just about individual choice, is it? These broader economic and social factors, they play a huge role in creating that sense of hopelessness that can lead people down self-destructive paths.
Absolutely. But it's not only about those facing socioeconomic hardship.
No, that's true. You shared David's story.
Yeah.
Someone with a supportive family, good education, but still really grappling with anxiety, depression, feeling like a fraud, basically.
David's experience really shows that vulnerability isn't just about external stuff. Internal pressures, the fear of failing, societal expectations, they can cause immense distress, even if someone looks like they have it all.
And his reliance on Paxil and Adderall.
Yeah, it offered some temporary relief, sure, but it became another kind of external fix rather than getting to the root of his anxiety and feelings of inadequacy.
It feels like there's maybe a bigger societal thing going on here, this almost obsessive chase for happiness, trying to eliminate all pain. You mentioned how our modern view of kids as psychologically fragile is quite different from historical views.
It's interesting, yeah, how the pendulum has swung. Historically, there was often more focus on building resilience through challenges. The modern approach seems much more geared towards protecting from distress.
Right, the, star of the week for everyone in class, the intense focus on triggers and safe spaces. It does make you wonder if we're accidentally making kids less able to handle life's inevitable bumps.
And Kevin's I do whatever I want attitude.
Yeah, that seems like an extreme version of just wanting to avoid any discomfort at all.
This constant shielding and affirmation, even if it's well-intentioned, might foster a sort of entitlement, maybe, a lower tolerance for frustration. Are we so busy protecting kids from adversity that we're actually hindering their ability to develop coping skills? It's a fair question.
And this goes beyond childhood, right? This societal push for a pain-free life. It's pretty recent, considering historically some pain was seen as, well, even healthy.
Exactly. You mentioned surgeons back then being hesitant about anesthesia and that Thomas Sydenham quote about moderate pain serving nature's purposes.
Yeah. There used to be this understanding that discomfort, even pain, could be part of the body healing itself. The modern idea that we should eliminate all pain is a massive shift.
A huge shift in how we see health and how much we rely on interventions.
And this expectation has definitely fueled the explosion in prescribing feel-good pills. The numbers are pretty staggering.
They are. Over 1 in 4 American adults, 1 in 20 kids on a psychiatric drug daily, and the global rise in antidepressant use, US, Iceland, Australia, way up there.
It highlights this societal discomfort we have with negative feelings, doesn't it? And how quick we are to look for a pill to fix psychological distress.
But as we're seeing, it's not always the most sustainable or complete approach.
That story about the patient told to just walk to class without distractions.
Yeah.
It's so telling.
Her initial reaction rate, just disbelief, just walk with my thoughts.
Yeah. And then eventually she starts noticing the trees. It just shows how much we actively try to avoid those quiet moments of just being with ourselves.
It really raises a point about constant distraction. By always seeking outside stimulation, are we missing chances for self-discovery, for connecting with our own inner experience and the world right around us?
Okay, so given this environment just saturated with rewards and our natural tendency to dodge pain, what are some actual strategies? How do we find a healthier balance? You introduced this idea of dopamine fasting through Delilah's story. Could you unpack that dopamine framework a bit?
Sure. The dopamine framework, it's basically a structured way to help people become more aware of their relationship with these high dopamine activities. So the D is for data, just tracking usage.
Okay, data. Got it.
O now is objectives understanding what the substance or behavior actually does for you. Like for Delilah, it was managing anxiety.
Right. And P is problems.
Problems, exactly. Identifying the downsides, the negative consequences. And it's interesting, Delilah initially couldn't see much beyond her parents disapproving. That seems pretty common.
No blind spot, yeah.
Yeah, these rewards can really cloud our judgment about the negative impacts. Then A is for abstinence.
The crucial part. Stepping away for a bit.
Usually at least 4 weeks. It helps you see the connection between the use and underlying issues, like Delilah's anxiety surfaced more clearly.
And M is mindfulness. Being ready for things to feel worse initially.
Exactly. Withdrawal isn't fun. Your brain needs time to readjust. Any is for insight, the clarity that often comes after that abstinence period. You just can't get that insight while you're still actively doing the thing.
Makes sense.
And finally, NE is next steps, exploring options, thinking about how you want to move forward. Delilah wanting to eventually use marijuana again, but more controlled. That's a really common goal.
Yeah, it seems like many people, even after seeing the benefits of stopping, hope they can find a way back. But, manage it better.
Which brings us to self-binding strategies.
Right. What exactly does that mean, self-binding?
It just means taking actions now to limit your future choices, especially around temptations. Environmental self-binding is about physical barriers, like Oscar locking up his booze, wife has the key.
Huh. And his attempts to break in with tools, ending up with pliers and a straw. That's commitment.
It shows the lengths we might go to, right? But also that these physical barriers can work, even if imperfectly.
And medication can be a form of self-binding, too, like naltrexone for alcohol, blocking the opioid receptors.
Yes, it creates a kind of pharmacological barrier, reducing the rewarding effects. But like that patient who used it as needed so he could still enjoy bacon.
Yeah, that was interesting.
It shows it can sometimes blunt pleasure more generally, so it needs a nuanced approach.
And even weight loss surgery, while not for addiction per se, acts as self-binding. But sometimes with those unintended consequences, like people developing alcohol issues after gastric bypass.
Right. Restricting one reward pathway can sometimes push people towards others. Then there's categorical self-binding.
Setting broader rules.
Exactly, like Jacob deciding to avoid not just porn, but any sexually suggestive stuff after his relapse. Or Mitch, the sports gambler, having to avoid not just betting, but watching, reading, listening to sports altogether. It shows how deep these triggers can go.
It's like creating a whole new personal rule book. Even common things like specific diets, vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, could be seen as a form of this.
Absolutely. Though, as you pointed out with the explosion of gluten-free products, market forces can sometimes undermine these strategies by just offering more alternatives.
Yeah, the market adapts pretty quickly.
And it's worth noting how stuff that was once taboo, vape pens, ZYN pouches, even OxyContin initially, medical marijuana becomes normalized, commodified, often with this sort of sheen of safety or medical approval.
There was also that intriguing idea of deifying the demonized.
Yeah.
Using previously forbidden things in very specific sacred rituals.
It's another way of creating a very strict framework. It shows how the context and the intention around using something can totally change our relationship with it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about limiting pleasure, finding balance that way. But what about the other side? This idea of actively seeking pain to get more lasting pleasure. That sounds, backwards.
It does sound counterintuitive, yeah. But it's about intentionally engaging with discomfort to ultimately find a more sustainable kind of well-being. Michael's experience with cold showers and ice baths is a great example.
He described feeling this high, right? Similar to drugs.
He did. And it lines up with that Charles University study showing big jumps in dopamine and norepinephrine, the very neurochemicals involved in pleasure and drive after cold water immersion.
A 250% dopamine increase, 530% norepinephrine, just from cold water. Wow, those are serious numbers. Explains the powerful effect he felt.
Totally. Pain basically triggers the body's natural balancing act, its homeostatic mechanisms. Pleasure, in that context, is the rebound, the body restoring equilibrium after the stress.
So the pleasure is the response to the pain.
Exactly. And with repeated, moderate exposure to these kinds of stressors, our baseline sense of well-being might actually shift upwards over time. We become more resilient to both physical and emotional hits.
And this connects to hormesis, right? That idea that small doses of something potentially harmful can actually be good for you. Like a vaccine, kind of.
Precisely. Edward Calabrese talks about it as this adaptive response to moderate challenges, leading to better function, increased tolerance. The worm experiment with heat shows it perfectly.
Moderate heat helped them live longer and tolerate more heat, but too much was bad.
Right. And you see this concept elsewhere, too. Radiation hormesis is controversial, but things like intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, those show benefits in animals for lifespan and disease resistance.
And exercise is the big one, isn't it?
Probably the best known example. Initially, it's toxic to cells, puts stress on the system, but the overall effects, overwhelmingly positive. Huge benefits for mood, anxiety, thinking, energy, sleep, often better than medication.
Which really throws our modern sedentary lives into sharp relief.
It really does. It's like we've gotten so used to comfort that we're missing out on these built-in ways our bodies have to build resilience and well-being.
But deliberately seeking out pain.
Yeah.
It's hard. It goes against every instinct.
It absolutely does. It takes conscious effort, a willingness to step outside the comfort zone, trusting there's a payoff on the other side. It's a lesson we often need to relearn, I think.
So, moving beyond the physical strategies, what about the psychological side, the social side? You really emphasize honesty, accountability, and connection.
Yeah, these feel fundamental for recovery, sure, but just for general well-being too. Honesty, especially about our struggles or vulnerabilities, it can actually forge deeper connections.
Jacob's story, again, being radically honest with his wife after relapse, that vulnerability being the foundation for rebuilding trust.
It's powerful. And it is counterintuitive, like you said. We often fear showing flaws will push people away.
But genuine vulnerability can be incredibly connecting. You also made that distinction between real self-disclosure for intimacy and what you call disclosure porn.
Yeah, that's a critical difference. True honesty is about building understanding and connection. The other is often more about seeking validation or even manipulating without real vulnerability.
And truthful stories about ourselves, where we own our part in things. Those are signs of mental health, right? As opposed to just victim narratives.
Definitely. How we narrate our lives matters. Acknowledging our own role opens the door to growth. That really resonated with your personal anecdote, too, about the 12 steps in your mother.
Yeah, gaining that new perspective, leading to forgiveness and a better connection, it really brought that point home for me.
Our stories shape us, and honestly, examining them helps. This connects to that idea of the false self, Winnicott's term for the polished image we present. Social media can really amplify that, right? Encouraging these curated, unreal narratives.
Totally. It's like everyone's showing a highlight reel, and it can lead to feeling disconnected, unreal, even depersonalized.
But the flip side is also true. Healing can be contagious, too. Within families, social circles. When one person makes positive changes, it often ripples outwards.
That's hopeful.
And reliability, truthfulness in our relationships. It builds what they call a plenty mindset, a sense of security, trust, as opposed to a scarcity mindset that comes from broken promises and dishonesty. That experiment you mentioned about narratives affecting delayed gratification really backs that up.
Makes total sense. If we feel secure and trust people, we're more willing to wait for a bigger payoff later. So how does this truth-telling apply not just in recovery, but maybe as prevention?
Well, Drake's story being honest after his DUI, the unexpected positive outcomes it suggests that maybe radical honesty, even when it means facing tough consequences up front, could actually change our path for the better.
Compared to someone like Lori initially resisting acknowledging her problem and getting discouraged from honesty by her church.
Yeah, that highlights the danger when environments don't support honesty about struggles. It can lead to destructive shame.
Right. So shame can be destructive or it can be pro-social. Can you explain that difference?
Destructive shame makes us hide, isolate, and often deepens the problem behavior. Pro-social shame is different. It's about being honest about overconsumption or struggles within a supportive context.
Okay.
This leads to acceptance, empathy, and usually a requirement to take action, make amends. The result is often increased belonging and decreased consumption.
Todd's experience with AA, calling it the first safe place to express vulnerability. That sounds like pro-social shame in action.
Exactly. And the focus on step 10, ongoing inventory, promptly admitting wrongs, is key to that.
That idea of a first safe place is so powerful. And understanding that a truthful self-look helps us understand ourselves and respond to others with both accountability and compassion. It fosters real connection, not judgment.
Precisely. AA provides a model for this. Clear group norms are important. And interestingly, even relapse, if it's honestly disclosed in that setting, can actually strengthen the group bonds. It creates chances for support for shared learning.
Whereas the free riders, the ones who don't stick to the norms or hide relapse,
They threaten the club goods, basically the rewards of belonging to that supportive group.
and Lori eventually found recovery through AA.
Yes, emphasizing the huge relief of finally letting go of secrets, finding acceptance, and building real, honest relationships.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've hit on some really key insights. This delicate dance between pleasure and pain in our brains, the huge impact of our dopamine-heavy world, and ultimately the power of self-awareness, gained through honesty and maybe being willing to embrace some discomfort.
Yeah, if we circle back to the beginning, it's clear that finding a better balance isn't about stamping out pleasure or just chasing it endlessly. It's more about understanding these deep mechanisms inside us and then making conscious choices that support our well-being in the long run.
And that brings me to a final thought for you, our listener. Instead of always looking for an escape, a quick fix, in this world that offers so many ways to check out, what if we actually turned towards our lives? What if we committed to real connection, to meaningful experiences, even knowing they might involve some discomfort or vulnerability?
It might not be the easy answer we often look for.
No, definitely not the easy answer, but maybe it's a more sustainable path, a more rewarding one ultimately. We really encourage you to think about the balance in your own life. What small, maybe honest steps could you take towards greater awareness, greater authenticity?